Hello, everybody. I'm Eleanor Mills, the founder of Noon. Welcome to this number 3 Noon Book Club. It's great to have you all here. We're really excited this evening. We've got a really fantastic author. I must say I've really loved her book, which I know lots of you have been reading. She is Rosanna Amaka, and we've got, of course, fantastic Sam Baker is going to do the interviewing. I hope that may have just started again anyway.
You're still
and sorry, it's all turned around on my screen. The perils of Noon. There we go. So we're totally thrilled to have Rosanna with us today. Her book, The Book of Echoes, I found one of the most kind of poignant, absorbing, kind of emotionally kind of heart-rending books I've read in a really long time. It told me so much about the diaspora and the interlinking of our world and its history, which I hadn't known about. And I also thought it was just so beautifully written, which was just a real joy. I devoured it in a few days while I was on holiday earlier this summer. So I hope that you've all enjoyed it too. And I think this is going to be a very special conversation between Sam and Rosanna. And I hope you enjoy it. We've had some great ones so far, Curtis Sittenfield and Ruth Jones. And I'm sure this one will be just as fantastic. So good luck, all of you.
Thanks, Eleanor. No pressure, Rosanna.
Yeah.
Before I introduce Rosanna properly, just in case this is your first book club, a reminder that we want this to be as close to a real life book club as possible. So what we do is we weave your questions throughout our conversation. So please start posting your questions in the Q&A box as soon as you think of them, and I'll pick them up as we go. So Rosanna Amaka is a debut novelist who, after a life spent working as an engineer, published her first novel, the very much praised The Book of Echoes, at the age of 50. But really, The Book of Echoes is a lifelong work because Rosanna started writing it more than 20 years ago. When it was published in hardback last year, it was an instant critical hit. It was described as a new classic by Sarah Collins, author of the best-selling The Confessions of Franny Langton, searing and rhapsodic by Irena Sinakoji, and powerfully redemptive by The Independent. Even the Daily Mail liked it, and that's no small achievement, Rosanna. It went on to be shortlisted for awards by the Historical Writers Association, the Royal Society of Literature, and the Authors Club. Now, I wouldn't be as presumptuous as to even try to sum up the Book of Echoes. So instead, let me hand over to Rosanna now to give us a short reading and tell us a little bit more about the plot. Rosanna, over to you.
Thank you for having me. The Book of Echoes is narrated by, I'm assuming, is narrated by an enslaved African woman who is basically roaming the earth trying to find her children. And she comes across Michael, who's based in Brixton, and Ngozi, who's based in Nigeria, and she follows their story. So I'm going to start reading right from the beginning of the book, from page 1. And this tells you the story, her story of how she comes to start to roam the docks and the world. The beginning, London. West India Docks, 1803. They dragged me from the ship, kicking and screaming. I heard them enter the hold, heard them begin to search. The two voices grew louder as they approached the hole where wind had hidden us. I held my hand over my mouth to stop the nausea, the other over my heart to calm its beating. Felt the dead boy beside me. Smelt him. Cowered downwards, deeper, towards the spot where I could feel a little breeze coming through. I prayed then for freedom, for wind, for our precious belly, for the dream that wind had forced me to believe in. Then I heard someone walk off, heard his footsteps die away on the deck, heard the other follow. My heart lifted. Then he stopped, paused, as if he was having one last look around, sniffing the air, and turned right around. His footsteps became louder as he drew closer. He jerkily shoved the barrels aside, kicked the board covering the hole, bent down low, peered in. His eyes seemed to glitter. I screamed. In here, he called. Quick! He reached into the hole and grabbed hold of my arm, my dress, my ankle, pulled me feet first out of that hole. I shrieked, felt the pain as our precious belly dragged against the sides of the hole, knocking my head. I clung to the edges for dear life, felt the pain as he yanked harder at my ankle. Then he stopped, came over to bend my fingers back, and I kept crying, no, as he loosened my grip before dragging me out by my collar, along the deck, up the stairs, each step striking my belly, my head. I felt the splinters in my palms sting as I tried to resist, tried to get a grip, felt the cold night breeze on my face as they hauled me out onto the top deck, down the gangway, before smashing me and our belly against hard cobbled ground. The pain shot through me and I emptied my stomach of the little I had left in it. It must have been the smell of the boy that led them to us. The gangrene had got him the day before. Earlier, wind had hung his head like it was too heavy for him to carry when he realized he was too late. He took his cap off, kneeled, and reached in to close the boy's eyes gently, then prayed like the white sailors do. I placed my hand on his shoulder, tried to console him, but he shrugged it off, then turned to lift me into the barrel, but I wouldn't let him. I grabbed his face between my hands, stared into his eyes, forced him to look into mine, placed his hand on our belly, and he finally understood. She was tender. I did not think she could take the rolling. He did not want to let me go. So I kissed him on his mouth, breathed my strength into him, like he had breathed into me. And he promised, with the twitch of his eyes, to return, to come back with a sack and fetch me from the hole. Okay.
Wow. It's so powerful right from the very beginning. Let's start by talking about the characters a bit. Which character did you start with? Cast your mind back right to the beginning of the writing process all that time ago.
I started with Michael, and basically I was working away from home, and I think there was I was back. Well, you're in Edinburgh, aren't you? But
Yes,
yeah. So I was working in Scotland at the time, and I think I had decided that I wasn't going to get a television, that I was going to write a book. But I also think that
oh, you overachiever.
I've always written, but I just wanted to. It's something that I wanted to do, but so anyway, so I started to write, and I think there was a little bit of homesickness, and because of homesickness, I think I started with Michael and Brixton.
So you grew up in Brixton in the 70s and 80s, yeah?
Yes, I did spend some time in Nigeria as well.
Right, so how much did your experience of growing up in Brixton and the time you spent in Nigeria, how much did that inform the characters and the location? Because the places are almost characters too, aren't they?
Yes, it informed it greatly. As I said, I was away from home, so there was a kind of homesickness of wanting to recreate, the people that I knew. So there's most of the characters in there are basically a concoction, mixture of people that I've either come across, newspaper articles, just people. It's based on human beings.
And that humanity, I mean, that's not to say that when characters are completely out of your imagination, then they're not real, but the humanity of these characters really come across, I think. So Michael's, it's quite difficult to talk about it without spoiling, isn't it? And I don't know, some of the audience will have read it and some will have finished it, and so we'll just have to play it by ear. But the experiences that Michael has, particularly in his youth, were those very common to the people that you knew?
No, they weren't common to the people that I knew, but I grew up in a household that was full of teachers, full of social workers. So in terms of characteristics, there are things that are common, but in terms of what actually happens to him and his mother, no, that's not common. But as I said, I grew up with so many stories, so many knowing so many issues that I brought some of that into the book.
So you started with Michael, and who walked in next?
Then I started to write about Ngozi. And then in the process of telling those two stories, then the narrator came in and took over.
The narrator is the most incredible character. What was it that made you decide to bring in that kind of ancestral aspect?
Because I think because of my background, actually, I have a Caribbean heritage. I have an African heritage, and I always used to think in my head, well, what would my ancestor think of me? So those thoughts were going in my head, and then I thought, and then I think that brought the narrator in, and she knew what was going on with them and wanted to, and felt that she could tell a better story than I could.
What did that, having that kind of, this might be a bit of a booky question, but that kind of narrative device, that you kind of gave yourself this omniscient third voice, didn't it? Did you find that freed you up? Did it make it easier to write the story?
Definitely. When she came in and started to tell the story, that's when I've sort of realized the advantages of actually telling the story through her, to allowing her, or the narrator, to tell the story, because you can see so much more than the actual individual characters can.
Were you ever tempted to make the narrator a bigger character?
Yes. So what the actual story of Ngozi and Michael, the narrator was telling the story originally, but I had a separate book that I was telling the narrator's story in. So the parts where she tells her story comes from another book that I was writing about her story. And it's when I found an agent that they said, I like the narrator telling the story, but I want to know more about her. So I brought more of her story into the book.
Right. So did you have two books going at the same time?
I think most writers do, don't they?
Yeah. But yes, they do. A lot of them do. But you're such an overachiever, honestly. Are we ever going to see that book? That book, the narrator book?
I'm not sure, because it's not a full book. It was a book that I had started, like so many, you start these things, but you never quite finish it. So that's why I took sections of that book that I thought were that were relevant to this story, and took that and put it into this book. But I do want to go back and tell her story eventually.
Because she's such a powerful character. I mean, quite often when you talk to writers, they will say that a character walked in and took over. And if you've never written a book, sometimes you don't quite believe that characters can do that. But your narrator really feels like she's got the potential to do that. Is she, apologies for not, that I don't remember this, is she nameless, your narrator?
Yes, she is. And
Go on.
yeah, I purposely made her nameless because there were so many enslaved people that were just listed as stock items and had no names, particularly those that died on the Middle Passage. So I wanted to give her a voice, wanted to bring her forth, but I also wanted people to realize that she is one of the voices amongst, you know, a lot of people.
That phrase, stock items, that really concentrates your mind, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It really does, to think of it in that way. Ngozi, tell us a bit about where she came from.
Well, as I said, I've visited Nigeria. I've spent some years in Nigeria, a few years as a child, and you know, observations, people that I know, talking to people, and the strength of stories that you know, there's a lot of strong women that I came across, that despite the hardships that they were forging forward, and I wanted to bring her alive in the book and tell her story.
I mean, she really has the most incredibly tough time, doesn't she? Even from a young child.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that experience that she has?
Yep. Like so many people in the world, you know, education is a way of finding freedom, or finding a way of having choices. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you see it, her family's way of trying to get freedom or get a way of having choices was for her to go and work for another family. But in the process of doing that, there's many things that happen to her. And I wanted that story to come for people to hear that story, to try and understand some of the challenges that other women have in the world. And you know, you hear some people say, oh, you know, it feels like sometimes when I listen to people talk, it's almost like it's them over there. We had a similar system in this country, you know, about 100 years ago. There were people that went away to work as maids and that were abused. So it's not a dissimilar story, but for some reason we have disconnected ourselves from our links, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And poverty. So I wanted to tell that story, to not just for people to understand Ngozi's story, but to somehow try and understand the mother story and her choices as well.
Ngozi's mother.
Yes. And the choices that she makes, it's whatever way it is, it's not easy. And I was hoping that in telling that story, that we as women would reach out more to each other and try and help each other more.
Yeah, because the you know, you and I had a chat before, and we're talking about, you know, you were saying about how, you know, poverty, obviously it makes every decision much harder.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can make a good decision, as, you know, Ngozi made good and bad decisions, but the decisions that her mother makes are when things, this is so hard without spoilering, isn't it? It's so hard. Have most people read it? Can you like pop in the book and tell me if most people have read it, because it will make it a bit easier for us. Oh yes, lots of yeses popping up. Oh no, okay, we've got a like a no with lots of exclamation marks, so I can't ask the question the way I was going to. All right, okay, thank you everybody. Okay, well, a thing happens to Ngozi, and how do we put it? Her mother she doesn't act. And that is, you know, I'm sure many of us as carers or parents have been in a situation where we haven't known whether it's better to act or not. But she doesn't act, partly because she has other children to worry about too.
But I think she acts in the beginning,
Yes,
but she
yeah.
doesn't act later because things get worse. And because it becomes something different. When she had a little bit more, when she was in a position to make to be able to make choices, she made better choices. But when it became a life and death issue, not just for herself, but for the rest of the family, she made other decisions that you just wouldn't imagine that she would have made at the beginning.
I mean, Ngozi and the other, you know, most of the other women, they're all incredibly strong and resilient. Do you think that is a way of putting more responsibility on the women? Not you, but the kind of the expectation that women will be strong and will cope and will somehow get through, as Ngozi does. That's, you know, that's patriarchy talking, isn't it?
It is, but it's talking from a position of having choices. So
Yes.
me and you are in a position where we have those choices, where we can make those, we can talk about whether people make decisions or not. But when you are fighting for your life and trying to feed your family, it's a different perspective.
And was that, you know, was that one of your aims, that you would hope that people would just start to see beyond the end of their nose by reading Ngozi's story and relating to Ngozi?
Yeah, I was hoping that, you know, that there would be a bit more understanding, and in understanding each other more, we would reach out more, if you understand
Yeah,
what I mean.
yeah, totally. Debbie has asked, Debbie, you put your question in chat. Can you, if you're going to post a question, please post it in Q&A. Debbie has said that she wonders about Ngozi's, that she doesn't reflect. I mean, you've just been speaking about this, really. She doesn't reflect too much on the things that happened to her. Is that about self-preservation to a certain extent?
It's about self-preservation and survival. You know, I think what happens with a lot of us, or a lot of women, or a lot of people, is that when you're going through the process, you're too busy just trying to fight through it to actually reflect. And a lot of the reflection comes after you've gone through it, years afterwards, and you're sitting back, and then you reflect and start to think and it starts to play on your mind. But you, in that going through it, it's survival.
So I'm kind of going to jump ahead to some questions I was going to ask later, because it ties into this. Do you think that finishing this book 20 years after you started it enabled you to apply some of that reflection to your characters?
I think, well, there is, in order to write the book, you have to reflect. It's, in terms of the book that I have now, if I sit back knowing what I know now as an older person, and having gone through life, yes, it will, you know, the more experience you have, the more that changes how you see things or how you assess things. But yeah, I think there was lots of reflection when I was writing the book, and there's lots of reflections looking back at the finished product as well.
Tell me a bit about that, about the looking back at the finished product.
Well, I mean, there is a lot more of a story to tell. In terms of where the book stopped, you know, I think it stopped where it was meant to stop. But in my head, the story still goes on. You know, there's not just a, you know, no, you don't just, in life, you don't just close a book. That's what happens in a book. But in my head, these characters are real, so they continue with their lives, even though it stops even though the book has stopped where it is. In my head, there's still a continuing story.
I really like that, because I think that quite often books can be, I mean, this book isn't one of those books that just stops and you're left going, well, what the hell happens next? You know, but at the same time, you don't have one of those really neat tie it up with a bow endings, which is a bit annoying sometimes as a reader. It's a bit like, oh, it's a bit too neat. Did you leave it? Have you left it open so you can revisit them? Do you think you might revisit them?
Well, I haven't left it open to revisit them. I left it open because in my head, they're real people and they're still continuing their lives. I'm just not continuing to tell you the story, but maybe one day we might meet again. So they're in another part of London somewhere, still continuing and having their issues, their problems, and everything else that goes on in life.
I love that idea. There's it's a question here from Caroline, which is about the narrator. She says, did you know you were going to use a narrator at the beginning? No, it just evolved.
Yes.
Did all these things evolve in the first draft, or did they evolve as you went through more drafts?
No, the narrator was there in the first draft, but more of her story came in the more of her actual story came in later drafts.
It's quite something to stick with a story and a book and those characters for the length of time that you did. What was it about the story that made you keep at it, or did you go away and come back to it much later on?
Well, after I finished it, it was a story that I, as I said, to me, they're real human beings. So I had a connection to them. And I also gave the story to other members of my family, and they also felt the same way that I did. So, and they told me to just keep going. So I was fortunate enough to have support to keep pushing me to keep going, to keep trying.
And you weren't tempted to give up, to shove it under the bed and come back to it?
Oh, I shoved it off under the bed several times, but I knew I was coming back, back to it. Yeah. No, I mean, because I continued with my life. I wasn't just writing this book. So, you know, I was working and doing other things, but I knew that this is a book that I wanted to get published. And I did get to the point where I was going to self-publish it, but life had a different route for it.
Did you have did you send it to a lot of agents, a lot of publishers, and get nowhere then if you were going to self-publish?
Yes, definitely.
And how did they respond, or didn't they respond?
Well, I think it's difficult because most people that you send it to, you only send the first 3 chapters. So you send out the first 3 chapters, and I think, I don't know what happens, or either they make assumptions about what the story is about or what the story isn't about, but it just got rejected. Fortunately for me, right at the beginning when I first started sending it out, I did get a publisher that said, oh, you know, keep in touch.
So you did?
Yeah, 20 years later.
Oh, well, thank goodness, because your first 3 chapters, well, I suppose they could have been different then, but they're so powerful. I mean, how would you not want to know what comes next?
The opening part, that wasn't, it didn't start the story there.
So did it start with it started with Michael?
Yes.
Interesting. Interesting. Kay Devine has asked, how did the story come to you? Was it the ideas and the themes that you wanted to get across that came to you first, or was it the characters?
Well, as I've said, I think I write books on different levels. So the first, I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to write. I just thought, I want to write a book. But at the same time, there were things that were happening around me in the news. There were issues going on. So I think that in the process of writing that story, that those things came into it as well, because those are the things that I also wanted to address as well.
Kay has also snuck in another question here. She said she also still imagines what Ngozi and Michael might be doing. Might there be more of them?
It could. I don't know what I'm going to write in the future, but I do know that they're continuing their lives, and I could come back to their story later.
She's just not going to tell us, Kay,
I
basically.
don't know. I'm not somebody that sits down and says, okay, this is what I'm going to write. I think I go with what I feel that I need to write at that time. So I'm happy knowing that they're there. In my head, they're still together. I think that they've had issues and problems and ups and downs, but they're still together.
Yeah, I bet. I imagine that Ngozi has to give Michael a piece of her mind occasionally.
Yeah.
Another character that I absolutely loved is Marcia.
Yes.
Michael's sister. She's absolutely great. Okay, says you've given her a glimmer of hope. So, can you tell us a little bit about Marcia?
Yeah, I love Marcia. She's the glue, isn't she? She's the center that actually that keeps, even though Michael is the one that's striving to sorry about this. Even though Michael is the one that's striving to keep his sister, she is actually the one that actually keeps the family together. I believe.
Yeah.
Right. He's striving to keep the family together on a physical level, but I think that Marcia keeps the family together more on a spiritual and an emotional level.
And she's so young.
She is. Yeah.
In a way, she picks up where her mother leaves off, even as a small girl, doesn't she?
Yeah. That's her mothers are such so important, and it doesn't matter. Well, they leave such an impact on us, don't they? Good or bad.
Indeed.
So yeah. So through her, you start to get to know a little bit of what her mother who she could have been.
One of the things that really has stayed with me since I first read the book was is the sense of community and the importance of community, almost more than family, like kind of family plus the extended family, and that, you know, the family who support Michael and Marcia, and Ngozi's self-made family in Nigeria. What do you think about what's happened to community since you started writing the book and it's the part it plays?
I think it's, for me, I think it's very sad. I think that the community, where family fails, community is so important, and so much, you know, they can, if you go into a lot of backgrounds and a lot of people's family backgrounds, it's that community, it's the aunts, it's the grandmothers, it's the, you know, there's so many stories from Nigeria to Ireland to wherever it is that you want to go. That supporting structure has been so important, and unfortunately, from what I can see, it's broken down to a certain extent. People are trying to hold on to it, and some people have been successful, but in a lot of ways, it has broken down.
I mean, Michael's obviously a massive character, but what I can keep coming back to is the powerful women in all in their different ways throughout the book, in Nigeria, in London, in the ether. And Do you think that we're seeing, I mean, we're hearing a lot about telling women's stories, but do you think we're seeing enough Black women's stories and older Black women's stories?
I don't feel that there's enough variety. I think that we're hearing young people's stories and their experiences, but not enough of a variety of the different types of stories that need to be heard. And there's so much to understand and to learn about in life through reading those stories, that I think it's important that they're told and more of them are published.
Do you think things are improving at all in the kind of publishing environment?
It's difficult to say it yes or no, because I think we're still going through a change. So I don't know where that change is going to end up, or whether it's just a temporary change, or whether it's going to be a permanent change. But the important thing is that there is a change going on, and we just got to work and hope and contribute towards making it a more permanent change.
Totally. I mean, did you feel that you could see, when you were writing, did you feel that you could see your stories and stories that you identified and stories that you wanted to see told being told?
Not at the time, not in terms of Black British writing, no. The stories that I had to go to stories being told in America, or stories being told in Africa, or those places where I got a bit of a glimpse, but not my actual story, or in the Caribbean, but not the mixture and the life that was here, no. I think there's more, but still.
One of the things that is really interesting that comes across when Ngozi first comes to Britain, and then also when she meets Michael, is that her preconceptions,
Yes,
as well, about race, and the fact that when she sees the old white man with the young Black boys, she just assumes that they're bullying him rather than the other way around, and she has ideas about what she thinks Jamaicans who live in Britain are like. And I think it's very rare for us to see that portrayed, for for it not to be treated like an amorphous mob almost,
Well, it goes to show you that the media has an effect on everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that many more stories are told, so that we break these preconceived ideas that are not right, that we look at people more as human beings and the variety of human beings that they are, the good and the bad, not just one specific way of looking, which the media has told us to look at a particular group.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sarah McRae has asked what books were your favorite as a child?
Oh, I think the usual ones, The Bluest Eye. I read that book, and I just fell in love with that book, and as soon as I read it, I loved Silas Marner. I read that book and I fell in love with that. There was quite a few of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. So there's so many.
How old were you when you were reading those?
Silas Marner, I think I was about 12.
Wow. What about, I had a conversation with Sarah Collins where she was talking about reading, she was talking about what made her write Franny Langton, if you've read the Confessions of Franny Langton, and about the fact that she never saw herself reflected in those books. Did you have a similar feeling when you were reading those classics?
No, because I don't think that as a child you think you know that something's not quite right, but you can't really put your finger on it. And you know you're reading these books and you're not reflected. You don't consciously, you know that you want something, but you don't know what it is that you want as a 12-year-old. And it's only as you get older that you realize what it is.
That's interesting. If you were now thinking about that, what would this might be a bit of a difficult question to come up with on the hoof, so I might ask you now and maybe you can think about it. What would be the characters that you would like to reimagine?
Well, that's why I wrote the Book of Echoes.
Yes.
So that I could see the characters that I wanted to read about.
Cool. Were you surprised by the reception it had?
Well, because when you go on a 20-year journey and you've had many rejections, you get to the point where you think, okay, well, it's only a particular group of people that would be interested in this book. So you go, so that's why I was going down to self-publish. So I was thinking my aunts, you know, my friends, they're the ones that want to read that book. So I'm going to self-publish this book for them. And then when you get to the point where it's because it turned around quite after 20 years, it turned around from nobody wanting it. Within 6 months of, within 6 months, I had, several rejections, nobody wanting it. And then 6 months later, I had an agent, I had a publisher, and it just seemed to just go from zero to full on. So yeah, it's been a great surprise, and a little bit of a shock for the way it turned around as well.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you get to a point, don't you, where you've just been keeping on going for so long that you expect that to carry on being the trajectory.
Yeah, and it's a bit like you're putting your foot out in the you're expecting the doors to shut, and yet the door is open, and you're kind of creeping in and looking around thinking, are you sure?
It's it's crap that it feels like that though, isn't it?
Yeah. But the good thing is that it did turn around. But either way, I was going to get it published.
Yeah, we weren't going to stop until it. What advice would you give to anyone who is probably not been maybe writing for 20 years, but has been wanting to and just needs something to give them that extra push?
Well, I think that you have to sit down and do it. You have to set yourself goals and time, or as time. I don't know, everybody's so time poor at the moment with so much going on in life, but maybe you just have to carve out 20 minutes of your day and just say, okay, during these 20 minutes, I'm going to write. And it doesn't matter what I'm going to write, because I believe that eventually, if you just get into routine, it will come. It came to me. So it will come, and what's in you will come out. But you need to get into that routine.
And did you do that? Did you just sit down and write whatever came out and not think about it, just write?
Yeah, because as I said, I it was a challenge, and I thought I didn't have a TV, so I didn't have anything to distract me, and I was away from home, so I had to sit down there, and I think I first started just writing the cat, and within no time the story came.
It's really fascinating. There's a question from Fiona. She says the older female characters are glorious. I absolutely loved Eliza's naked sensuality, and the angels in both Michael and Ngozie's lives are older women. Miss Lorenz and Mrs. Okonkwo, to name just two. And yet, oh, sorry, it's the question's vanished. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, it was taken away before finished reading it. I've got it back now. Did they come to you as matured while you were writing the book, or were those older female characters always in its planning?
They were always there. I'm surrounded by, but I was, well, when I was younger, I was always surrounded by older women, and my grandparents, aunts. So they have influenced me a lot. So yeah, I've always admired older women, and now I'm an older woman.
Sorry, speaking of older women, my brain is just flatlined, menopause brain. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Gillian has said, do you personally identify with any of your characters?
I identify with all of them. I think you have to a certain degree, in order to write with them, write their story with some sort of empathy. You have to have a connection to them, particularly when they're going through some really tough times. So I have a connection to Marcia, have a connection to Ngozi and Michael, all three of them, even when I don't like what they're doing.
When you write, did you manage to pull off that thing that you really have to in order to write a brilliant novel, where you don't think about people reading it, you don't think about what the people reading it might think?
Well, as I said, it was a challenge, so I didn't even think it was going to get published. So, but I wasn't even thinking about an audience. I just wrote the book for my pleasure. Or, well, pleasure is the wrong word, but I wrote because of what happens in the book. But yeah, I wrote the book for me.
Do you think writing, I know you're working on something else, is it going to be harder writing something that you know is going to be read?
It is, if you let it intrude, but I think part of the enjoyment of writing, and I also think for me, writing is a form of therapy as well. So having that in mind, I write for me first and foremost, and then I think maybe when it gets to the publisher or the editor, then the audience maybe. But the first thing that you need to do to sustain you to write a book is that I believe you have to write it for yourself.
Yes, sure do. Alison has asked, did you have to refresh the stories within the novel over the course of writing it, because writing it was such a long time span?
I'm not quite understanding what you mean by refresh, but I had to re-edit maybe the way that I told the story, or the language that I used, or but the actual skeleton of the story has always been the same.
I think because the early story is 70s and 80s, and so that hasn't changed, but the ending, well, towards the ending, when I can't say, but the ending, and where the bit running up to the ending with Ngozi and Michael, sorry, I'm trying to say it without saying it, where it takes place.
Yeah.
Did that come later?
No, the ending was the same ending that I wrote when I finished it after 6 months. It's
Wow.
So the skeleton was the same, but maybe I changed the way in which I told it, or the language that I used to tell it, but I always knew what the ending was, or what the ending I wanted.
Fiona is now worried that it's going to be 20 years until the next book, but I don't think it will it? Have you got lots more books in you, and will they be in the same vein, or are there other places you want to explore through fiction?
There are other places that I want to explore through fiction. That's why when you asked me the question of will I be writing more about Ngozi or Michael, or or the story of the narrator. It's things that I can see that maybe in the future I'd want to, but there's so many other things that I'm finding interest in, that I'm exploring, researching, that so there's stories there that also I want to tell and explore.
What are you finding? What is inspiring and motivating you now in kind of popular culture or world affairs?
Oh gosh, I don't know what the word isn't inspiring is not the right word, but the thing that's affecting me at the moment is what's affecting everybody else, which is what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on in terms of global warming, and the floods and the fires, and you just feel so helpless. That those are the things that are, COVID. What's happening in terms of children's education. There's so many things going on in the world. It's a bit dizzying.
Yeah, it really is quite mind-blowing at the minute, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Linda has asked, earlier you said that contemporary community is broken down. What do you think that some of the broad factors that might have led to that?
I think it's lifestyle. As much as property prices, simple fact that whereas before people used to be able to afford the areas that their parents lived in, or or their sisters lived in, or uncles lived in, so they would move around they would move into the same area. So property prices has kind of blown that apart, because a lot of young people can't afford to move into the same areas that their parents live in. So when they're bringing up children, they don't have the grandparents around the corner, or the cousins to drop the children off to. So yeah, just the general life that we live has helped to break some of that apart.
So I'm just checking I haven't missed any questions. You contributed a really wonderful essay to the book, This Is How We Come Back Stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us?
Sorry, it was a short story.
Short story, sorry. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it was called Ping. And it's a short story about a woman going through the first lockdown that happened, and her experiences and her slowly unraveling.
Do you think you might want to write more about what's happening right now?
I think what's happening right now is very painful. It's so you feel, well, I don't know about you, but I feel so helpless. I don't really know what I can do. So I think at the moment I'm trying to figure out what it is that I can I want to contribute positively to this world, and I've got to figure out how I can do that. Yeah.
Do you still have the day job?
Not at the present moment. COVID has kind of put that on the back burner. So at the moment, my day job is writing my second novel.
Just in case your editor is listening, and where is it? There's quite a specific question from Claire, who says that she found Marcia's forgiveness of Simon challenging.
Yeah.
And she wondered how firstly how you formed Simon's character,
Mm-hmm.
and then secondly whether you think you could have forgiven him yourself.
That's a difficult one. I decided to, when I decided I was going to do some research into families that this had actually happened to, and what I found very surprising is that there was quite a few families that did forgive. So there are some very big-hearted people out there. I think it would be a bit conceited for me to say that I think that I was one of them. You have to actually live it to actually really know what you would do, I think.
Yeah, it's a
But
real.
Marcia is a big-hearted person.
And what about Simon? How did you come up with him?
Well, Simon, unfortunately, I've come across quite a few people that I knew had mental health issues. And I heard of a story of some not exactly, but something similar happening in a family. So that had always played on my mind, and the family I'm thinking that it happened to, they weren't, yeah, anyway. So it was always on my mind. So that's how I came up with him, because I always wanted to tell the story of Simon from the point of view that he didn't do this because he was horrible or evil. He was actually doing it because he thought he was helping.
Yeah.
He thought he was freeing her.
Wow, it's really a difficult one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It really is. I think Claire is probably still going to feel challenged by it. Who's working, writing at the moment do you admire?
Gosh, so there are so many great writers out there at the present moment. I'm just trying to think who I've read recently. I think for me that every book that I've read, I've come away with something more. For me, I always go back to the classics. So the James Baldwin and the Toni Morrison and the Chinua Achebe, and so I'm an old style writer, whereas I think there's a lot of younger modern writers, even though I think that they do, I can see the link in their writing to some of the classics as well. So it's a difficult one for me to pinpoint exactly, but I learn from everybody, I think. It sounds like a cop out, but truly, I learn from everybody.
That's not a cop out at all. I mean, you've Debbie has asked, you've mentioned your research a few times, and it is, I mean, it's incredibly complicated, but this is me, not Debbie, saying this a little bit. It's incredibly complicated. I mean, it's set in Nigeria and Brixton. It's set across different periods of time. It's, there's so much going on. Did you have to do a lot of in-depth research?
I think over 20 years, if you're doing research over 20 years, it doesn't feel like research. Because I when I was growing up, I went to Saturday school where I learned a lot about Black history. Whenever I traveled, I went to museums. Particularly, one of the museums that had an impact on this book was the Dockland Museum. So, I mean, if you ever get a chance to go there, if you haven't, please go there. It's a wonderful museum. So I always used to read. So if you're doing it over 20 years, it just feels like it's something I'm interested in. So I'm always going to be doing it. So it doesn't feel like research. Whereas the book that I'm writing now feels like research because it's more condensed. It's not spread over 20 years.
Are you going to tell us anything about the book you're writing now? Like a little clue, just a little?
Fortunately, once I've finished it and I know exactly what it is that I'm writing, then I can say. But if I say anything now and I change it, then then you say, but that's not what you said. So
Oh, we wouldn't. You're no fan. Did you do much in the way of interviewing for your research? This is a bit more of Debbie's question.
yes. One of the big interviewers, and unfortunately, she's passed away, was my grandmother. So both my grandmothers, so they told me a lot, and they were the ones that gave me some of the clues to, to find out more and do a lot more digging. So yeah, so both my grandmothers gave me quite a bit of information.
I think you hear so many people, writers and not writers, say that they wish they had spoken to their grandparents more because they feel like the stories have been lost.
Yes.
And that maybe, I wonder whether it is something to do with being, around about 50 or going a bit older and starting to want to know more about that. I don't know.
I've always spoken, because my grandmother, both they died quite a few years back now, but I've always been interested, so I've always asked right from teenage years. I've been asking questions, but you never get enough. So even now I think back and I think, oh, I wish I had asked that question, but I didn't know at that time that that was the question that I needed to ask.
That's the trouble, isn't it? You don't know the right questions. We're running out of time, so if anybody's got any more questions, pop them in the Q&A really quickly. I want to ask you, what do you think Rosanna, growing up in Brixton in the 70s and 80s, what do you think she would think now if she could see the book she's written?
She'd be shocked, because as a child I didn't have very much confidence. She'd be shocked that I became an engineer, and she'd be shocked that I wrote a book.
They seem like quite different things. Has being an engineer fed into writing at all, apart from being stuck in a hotel room in Scotland with no TV?
I think general life has fed into it. The general life of of being in a man's world and trying to struggle through it, and some of the things that I saw, some of that came through and influenced the book. So yeah, it's the actual work is different, but the actual life around it fed into the book. Yeah.
Interesting. There's lots of people saying thank you for writing such a wonderful book that was both challenging and inspirational and educational and wise. And I think many people will have thought, I certainly thought anyway, that my education in the 70s and 80s was just woeful. It was woeful. It was all, Elizabethans. And what do you think? I mean, God, there are so many things that could change, but if you could see one thing change, what would you like it to be?
The history that we're taught at schools, because I think the history that we're taught in schools actually affects the way that we see the world and the way we see ourselves in the world. And there are many young people growing up in schools that, without that knowledge of who they are or where they come from, it robs them of their confidence in the world. So the history taught in schools, yeah, for sure.
I think it's a really thought-provoking place to end. Thank you so much, Rosanna. Thank you for your wonderful book. Crack on with the next one, please, because we need it. Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming. You've been amazing and so many great questions. Thank you. See you all next month.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.